Welcome at Adda for a series of conversation, feast of ideas, and a lot of provocations.
All right, so we will get on with the questions and we would listen to you. You have been talking about the impact of the current situation on society, social structure, what kind of social dynamics would emerge. So to begin with, we would like to listen to the seasoned sociologist telling us about where we are headed socially.
Yeah. I think there are two dimensions to this this issue. One dimension is a global dimension, and this has an interface with a lot of questions and queries raised by sociologists across the world, and it relates to how to understand social theory itself. Is there a challenge to social theory? The second dimension relates to the specific national and local context of the problem. And this relates to the politics of governance in India.
Right.
So I would like to deal with the two differently. So can you tell me which one I start with?
You start with whichever you were, which fits your theme of discussion.
Okay, so I think in terms of my own personal experience, because I came by the last flight before the lockdown started, I can say that this politics, the governance of the pandemic has exposed the complete ineffectual understanding of how power can organize intervention for health that we saw. It's not only to do with just 4 hours of expectation to start the lockdown. It is about how lockdown was organized. It was the worst lockdown that any country has ever had. And it showed complete non-understanding of how the economy works and how the polity has to intervene with the economy. And this is a continuation of the Modi regime, from demonetization to GST to all the issues in which there is very little understanding how governance works, and there has been a lot of discussion among academics as well as journalists and critical commentators about how it is related to a very limited and a very narrow consultation process about of any policy intervention. So it is related to that, and if it had a very deep and significant impact in terms of demonetization, in terms of the pandemic, the complete breakdown of the system that it led to, I think we have seen in the last 3 months. Complete breakdown of the system because of the non-recognition of what is the specific aspects of the system in India. And it relates to the way in which the structure of labor and economy are organized with each other. And how the structure of labor economy is related to mobility and immobility both. but it's also related to transport, trade, and manufacturing, how that is all organized. The non-recognition of this has led to what we see as a migration problem at one level. And the latest, it has evoked a lot of economists to do some work on migration. And it has indicated to us that today we have about 50% of urban India, about 50 to 70, depends on how we assess the proportion of population working in urban India. And how much is urban India, because both are problematic in terms of trying to find out how much is India urban and how much are people work, how many people work in urban India. If we, these are two both problematic data sets. Depending on that, we can say 50 to 70% of urban India is migrant population. And most of the migrant population come from 3 to 4 states, UP, Bihar, West Bengal, and Madhya Pradesh. And secondly, it is not only in migration, but it's also out migration. So we have both, I mean, for instance, Maharashtra sends as many migrants out as many it receives. So there is a lot of information and assessment that we now have as a consequence of this crisis. But it has led to enormous suffering and enormous, and there is no recognition of this matter, that it was a governance problem. And there is a belief that people at the lower levels of marginalized groups are like economic commodities who can go up and down whenever the demand is there. That governance doesn't need to deal with the human concerns of these workers and laborers, but they are just economic units rather than human beings. The second aspect of this governance is related to the concept of social distancing. Actually, what was meant was physical distancing and not social distancing. But the use of the concept of social distancing institutionalized a way both casteism and patriarchy and majoritarianism, both, all three aspects. And I personally experienced it as a woman, but I have seen it being experienced in terms of the way, and I'm sure everyone knows this, that now that we have opened up, they are willing to have upper middle classes engage with each other and get employed, while lower groups in society find it still difficult to get employment. The particular group I have in mind is the maids, women who work as domestic workers. Their entry into housing societies, etc., have been very, very difficult, even though the lockdown was lifted on 3rd of May. So, and it has something to do with there being backward castes or scheduled castes or Muslims and women, both together. So, but casteism is rampant. And the fact that workers were thought of as economic commodities was also related to this whole question of social distancing. And we can see this represented in the way access to health system has been governed in the country. Who gets access to health? Who is allowed into the hospital? Gets even tested? Then how quarantine is organized. And part of the problem, as I said, the lack of recognition of what is the problem is the fact that urban India is so crowded, dense. Most people are living in less than one room, 8x8 room per household, or sometimes many people share that one 8x8 room, including some people who may not be family members. So as a consequence, this lack of recognition has also affected the way the health emergency has been organized. Okay, but it's part of a larger problem of neoliberalism, which started in the 80s and 90s, which is that the public health system, which was excellent for various cities, and I have Bombay in mind at this moment, but it is true for Ahmedabad to many other cities and Delhi, etc., started not being given enough budgets to be able to buy new equipment and to be able to employ human resources. So as a consequence, what we have seen is again a lack of recognition that they don't have health systems to be able to handle the pandemic. And again, it's a governance problem. The history of it, as it was received because of neoliberalism, and its present impact, because lockdown shouldn't have been done when you knew that you didn't have resources to handle it. And this can be seen in the way in which Kerala handled it, which because they had 2 or 3 epidemics earlier. One was SARS, one was the other epidemic, I forget the name. Anyway, because they had 2 epidemics earlier, they had upgraded their public health system. And they had decentralized it. And they had involved the community in it to organize its access and to implement it. And given the decentralization of governance in Kerala, they were able to handle it much better than the government of India, which just only thought of lockdown without having the normal health, the normal system which you needed. The first was testing, then was isolation, then was quarantine, then was contact tracing. But to do all this, you need people. And when people have been thrown out of jobs, and that is what has happened in public sector, then it is impossible to handle it. So you need different governance strategies. And they don't have it. No one has it. So this is a particular local problem that that has affected India. And I don't know where is the end to this now.
In the light of the failure of governance, has also underlined the fissure in social structure. Institutions of higher education are not apart from the kind of society that we are located in.
Yes.
And society has gone through lots of turmoil, and all kind of old fissures became more dramatically visible in this period. One wonders whether institutions of higher education would also reflect this fissure, or it would also show some of those collapses that we have witnessed in society.
Yeah. So in higher education, medical education is one part of it. And if you look at the history of medical education, it has followed the same path of neoliberal intervention. And so there are now private medical colleges and private doctors and nurses. And the problem is they are not trained properly, because they don't, most of the time, have hospitals with them. And so you have tuition kind of higher education without actual training of how to be good doctors and good nurses. And I saw it, yeah, like coaching classes, you know. And that is particularly true in North India, where these coaching classes have expanded, enormously. And so we have a snowballing effect as a consequence in terms of trained personnel. So you have at one level little to no employment of good trained personnel, at another level having many of them without having the qualifications to do it. It's like the Pakistani air pilots who are running the who were piloting the planes and without qualifications, or with wrong qualifications, yeah, or forged certificates. And so we have this, and this problem is there because of the privatization of higher education. Lack of public investment, and a belief that if you privatize, it is more efficient because public education is corrupt. And this is not to say that there won't be patronage and clientelism in public education. There is. But that doesn't mean that it is necessarily inefficient and necessarily bad. And that attitude of an understanding that has come in with the elite who make policies has led to further problems, you know. And setting up private education, elite medical colleges or any other colleges has been always has always been the way out, rather than upgrading the public education. So we have a problem in that. Yeah.
I have heard you speak about pedagogy as well in past.
Yeah.
And therefore I was thinking whether you would like to comment on this whole new trend about online academics, online higher education, and whether it is going to be a compromise on the pedagogic questions that some of you have been dealing with sometimes.
Yeah. See, I'm not a person who believes that online teaching is wrong. You know that I have participated in the UGC program of Epathshala. But I always have believed that online is a backup rather than the only access. And I also believe that that backup has to be done within the classroom and not without the classroom. So Epathshala was done as a backup for those Mofussil colleges and universities which did not have access to resources, and which did not have teachers who could have access to these resources. So it was for teachers as well as using for the teachers in the classroom. And it gave the intellectual resources to do so, because it was related to the resources being available through Inflibnet. However, just when the program of Epathshala was ending, the government of India cancelled all the resources that Inflibnet was giving to all colleges and universities, which included journals, which included access to journals, the whole package that Inflibnet was giving to public universities and colleges were all cancelled. And it was expected that each university and college would get it. So the Epathshala program got institutionalized. Again, this is part of a neoliberal thing. Got institutionalized without the resources being available to colleges and universities. And that was wrong, because no teacher could then get access to these resources. That is, articles quoted in the lectures and books quoted in the lectures, which was all given by Inflibnet at one point of time, and the government of India cancelled that. This was in the Kapil Sibal's regime. And since then, I don't see any effort being made to give access to library resources to colleges and universities. And I don't think one can do any teaching without without the teacher having a dialogue with the student, and B, indicating where the student can learn from, which means the resources should be available online to the student. And thirdly, to have an understanding of how to give regional language resources. Because a large number of our students, even the elite upper class students, sometimes don't know English. So it is in these circumstances that we are, I don't believe in the webinar thing because I have done 2 or 3 webinars on the pandemic, like the conversation we are having. And I find it difficult to handle students' questions because they come all together. And as a teacher, I find I can't have a dialogue with students. When you have in the classroom, you can stop yourself and address certain questions and clarify as we move ahead. Here it is without that break, and it is almost as if there is the teacher just informs the students rather than there is a discussion and debate. And the best pedagogy is when there is a discussion and debate, and the teacher allows herself to go backwards if possible, if the students have not understood. But that possibility doesn't exist in online teaching. So I'm not keen on it.
So lastly, I have taken a lot of time. My last question is about, you have also been giving us account of history of sociology in India. And I was thinking how this whole period, which is itself very historical in character, would shape up sociology in India in future, or how do you think sociologists are responding to this, or how they should be responding to this? I mean, what kind of trajectory do you see emerging from here?
We are in a crisis right now. So I think sociology in India is divided between between sociologists who are in elite universities and metropolitan cities versus those who are in non-metropolitan cities, and in everyday, in Mufuzil colleges and universities. And in both these sites, there are different embedded problems. The first one, it relates to democracy. And that is in elite metropolitan universities. There is a question about how lack of democracy in the functioning of the universities as institutions itself is constraining the ways to think sociologically. And that is a question that has come not only with neoliberalism, but with since 2014 with the BJP regime, and it's affecting some universities more than others. Delhi-based universities more than non-Delhi-based universities. So we have differences in this. For the second set of it, second group of universities, which are mainly state universities in different parts of the country, they have been so embedded in institutional crisis of not having human resources, not having physical resources. That is, libraries have not been updated, and human resources. I mean, for example, in Pune University, in most social science department, there are only 2 or 3 people teaching when there are 12 to 15 sanctioned posts. So this is true for almost all universities, state universities. And the problem gets magnified as more you go into Mufuzil areas. And of course, this is again to do with neoliberal policies, because budgets for higher education has been shifted to other places, So when you don't have resources at all, how do you teach? And casual and contract workers are being employed, and students are being employed, and those it is very difficult for individuals, and I really have enormous empathy for them, who are employed in this with very little payment to teach in this situation. And if they teach limitedly, it's also because of their own resources, intellectual resources, but it's also because they are not trained properly because of that history that has come to it, and they try as much as they can do, but they find it very difficult. And then what happens to the learning in this context? So I think there are such major challenges in these circumstances. That's very difficult. But I'll end by saying that I had said that there's a second part to the whole problem, is the global sociology. And I think we need to have engagement at a global level, just as we need to have an engagement at the national level and the regional levels. And the global level, it has to be on the question of risk that we are now facing globally. And risk theory is something that needs to be reconceptualized, but not in the way Beck or others have thought about it, but in terms of the way the political economy of risk needs to be understood. Because whatever the specific issues that I've raised about governance, the politics of governance in India has parallel but not similar issues, whether it's Brazil or Argentina or Philippines, or they have parallel problems And we need to have a dialogue and discussion on these. Now, whether we as sociologists, as a group of sociologists globally, nationally, locally, and regionally, have the resources and the infrastructure to handle this is a question that we have to understand and try and see if we can transcend these limitations. And the limitations are very huge.
Right. So it's always a great pleasure listening to your very informed discussion, Professor Patel. Thanks a lot.
Not at all, not at all. Thank you for asking me to give my ideas.